Esther chapter 4. I want to talk about your influence this morning. How many of you know you have an influence? I remember being told at a young age, you are an influence. It doesn't matter if you ask for it or not, you have influence on someone, somewhere, somehow. When I was in middle school, I didn't realize that my dumb middle school behavior in church affected the elementary kids because they thought that they wanted to be me, which they thought I was cool, which they didn't know a whole lot. And then when I got to high school, thought I got to be real cool. And I just remember being in middle school youth. And we would go, when I was in 6th grade, and we went on a youth trip. Same place that we take our students here. We went on a youth trip. We go up to Bryson City, North Carolina. I'm just new. I don't want to be picked on by the seniors or the juniors. So I feel like I need to make my mark. I need to show them that I had some influence. That, listen, I'm one of you guys. I know I'm a 6th grader, but I'm one of you guys. Like, I want to be on your team. And anybody want to guess how that turned out? I ended up falling asleep one night, waking up to some kind of concoction that had been put behind my ear that eventually ate all the skin off of my ear, which sent me to the doctor's office. So I say that because I realized I had influence, but I misused that influence to try to show how cool I was, and instead I got to talk to a nurse and have some pain. So never mix shampoo and I think it was contact solution and something else that all went into behind my ear, but whatever it was painful. We have influences, and what I want you to see today, we're going to talk about how God uses the life of Esther to leverage her position and influence so that you can do the same with yours. Now, I told you last week that power is what people always strive for, but influence is what you need. You need to have good character. Character is what sustains you. We get our character from the Lord. We've been looking at the life of Daniel, and we saw the characteristics of Daniel. We saw the characteristics of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they were not going to allow their character of who they were to be shifted by the world. They had their mind set on, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow what God says, because they were given influence. And so it's nothing any different from Esther. So in Esther 4, I want to summarize, because we're going to get to chapter 4, but it's really difficult to get to chapter 4 and understand it if you've not been through chapter 1 through 3. Y'all have ever seen the movie? You jumped in a movie and saw part 3, and it didn't make any sense, so you got to go back and watch part 1 and 2? Yeah, okay, just me, got it. So Esther's story, I want to summarize it for you. It takes place in modern day, what we would call Iran today. It happened around 483 BC, so a long time ago. The Jewish people have been in exile out of Israel for about 100 years. Remember, we talked about how God told them, if you obey, then this is going to be good, but if you disobey, there's going to be a problem. Well, there was a problem, and they've gone into exile, and this is where they found themselves in exile. They've been there about 100 years. So in Esther chapter 1, there's a guy named King Xerxes. You remember him? King Xerxes gets wasted at a party, and he orders his beautiful queen, Vashti, to come into the room. And it says that he asked her to come into the room with her crown on her head so that all of the drunken guys of royalty could gaze on her beauty. Translation, he wanted his wife to come in wearing nothing more than a crown and Boyz II Men playing in the background. That's what he was asking for. Okay? I'm trying to think of a scenario as a husband where that would be a good move, but he's not thinking. So he tries to showcase his wife in front of all of his friends, and he tells her to do this, and I love her response. No, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. And so the problem is, she says no. The king feels rejected, so he goes to his room and he cries and he whines about it because she just didn't listen to me. He's worked this thing up. It's such a drastic issue. And then something interesting happens, because one of the king's men, Xerxes' men, wise men, come in and says, hey man, you can't let your woman talk to you like that. If she talks to you that way and you don't do anything about this, what's going to happen is every woman in the kingdom is going to think they can talk to their spouse this way. So you need to handle the business. And the wise man says this in verse 18 of chapter 1. He says, before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media, they're going to hear what the queen did, and they're going to start treating their husbands the same way. So there'll be no end to this contempt and anger. So the wise men, who you now know by saying that statement is not very wise, says, we need to put a stop to this. So you're going to make an example out of her so nothing else is said. So I want you to think about all this for 1 second. The example that he's setting of his men ordering their wives that if she's not willing to strut her stuff in front of your friends, your drunk buddies, that's not a problem. That's okay. But her not letting you be the head of the house, that's the issue. This is what he's saying. It's not my words. I'm just telling you what he said. I don't believe this, okay? Just so you know. So Xerxes kicks Vashti out of the kingdom. He's like, okay, you're right. I mean, if I do this, everybody's going to think, so, hey, lady, I know we've been married. You got to go. And so he kicks her out. And that's the end of her. So now, on to the next thing, we got to find a new queen. There's got to be a replacement queen. So Xerxes holds a contest. And here's what chapter 2 says. In Esther chapter 2, verse 2, it says that his personal attendant suggested, by the way, if you're not getting anything else, get yourself around real wise people. He did not have a bunch of those, apparently. His personal attendant suggested, let us go out and search the empire to find these beautiful young virgins for the king. So they come across a Jewish girl named Esther. Esther. She enters into this contest. And Esther is a little orphan girl. And the one thing that she had going for her was her looks. Esther 2 says that she had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. Husbands, that was your cue to look at your wife and be like, girl, that's your verse. That's your verse. Too late now. But here's how the contest worked. You entered to the king's living quarters. The king would try you out. You would appear before the king. You would do some type of talent. I don't know if you did like a runway walk or whatever, and then you would sleep with the king, and then the next night he would do the same thing with someone else to try to determine who the best person, who the best fit was for him. And so he would do this over and over for a few months until he got a finalist, and he decided that this is the person that I want to be the replacement queen. So it comes time for Esther's turn. In verse 15, she says that she wins the contest. Now, this little Jewish refuge girl becomes the queen of Persia, a pagan nation. She now becomes the queen. And I know, to make sure that you know what just happened, when you grew up in church, when you heard about Esther, Esther was a person of virtue, and she had it all together, and she will eventually get there. But right now, I want you to understand how she got to the position that she got was entering into a contest where she had to use her body to be accepted to be made the queen. And after she becomes queen, there's a guy named Haman. Haman's basically, he's the prime minister of Persia, and he decides that we got a problem. I know it's been 100 years. The Jewish people have been under our reign, that we've made them the slaves, and we're ruling and reigning over them. But they're going to be a problem. They're multiplying too quick. We're going to have to get rid of some of them. We're going to have to take them out. So what I'd like to do is, Haman said, I think that we need to have a solution to the problem and just kill them all and be done with the Jewish people. So Haman goes and he presents this plan to Xerxes and says what we need to do is to exterminate all the Jews. And Xerxes, he's been pretty hands-off this whole time, not really doing anything to govern. Doesn't really pay attention to what Haman's asking him. And basically, he just, you ever been in those conversations where you're partially listening and you found out that you agreed to something that you didn't realize fully what you agreed to at the time because you weren't fully engaged? Guys, do you know what I'm talking? Thank you. All right. Because if not a guy in this house didn't admit that, we got an issue. Because I know we're all there. Anyway, I can... Selective hearing is a spiritual gift, I feel, because my wife can be in the other room talking to me. Yeah. And then the next thing I find out, we do have plans this weekend that I was not aware of that we have. And so what happens is that he wants to exterminate these Jewish people. But meanwhile, there's a guy named Mordecai who is outside of the gates of the city, and he overhears this conversation that the Jewish people are going to be annihilated, that he wants to get rid of all of them. And so he hears about the plot, and he gets a message to Esther. And he tells her, you've got to do something about this. They're going to destroy every single one of us. Because remember, Esther is Jewish, and now she's the queen of this pagan nation. If anybody's going to be able to speak on behalf of the people, it's going to be her. And so she sends a message back to him saying, Uncle Mordecai, what can I do? You remember what Xerxes does if a woman goes against what he says. Like he'll have me killed. You know what's going to happen if I disagree with him in public. And so imagine what he would do if I had the audacity to confront him and say, do not harm these people. then he would have me killed. And she's in a really weird spot, wouldn't you think? Like, this is the message that Mordecai is her uncle, and she's hearing what he's saying, but to actually carry that out could put her life at risk, even though she had the most influence. And Mordecai's response to her in chapter 13 is timeless. And this is our text this morning. In chapter 4, verse 13, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther, said, "Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. And if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise for some other place. But you and your relatives, you will die. And who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." In other words, don't think for 1 second that you're safe just because of who you are. You're Jewish. And when they go to take everybody else out, he will take you out. You are nothing more than a prize. There was no emotional connection between Xerxes and Esther. Would you agree with me? It was based off of what the looks were. She looks good. She makes me feel happy. And so I'm going to make her queen. But she's going to be in and out the door. He has no respect. He doesn't treat her the way that she should. He doesn't love her for the right reasons. It's all about what she has to offer. And so he's suggesting that she go before the king and confront him. So go tell the king, no, do not do this. And Persian law said if anybody came before the king uninvited, they would be killed. So you had to have an appointment. You had to have an appointment. And a woman coming to tell him that he's wrong and he's making a mistake, that's a death wish. But listen to Mordecai's confidence. Mordecai says God will accomplish his purposes. You believe that? Like, he'll accomplish his purposes. This might be bigger than you, but it's not bigger than him. And he will accomplish all that he wills, and he will accomplish all that he purposes. God's sovereignty is not an excuse for inactivity from his people. On the contrary, the sovereignty of God is the very thing that will empower us to do things that are way bigger than we are. Anybody can testify to that? That we will do things that are far bigger. You never dreamed that you could. But outside of God, you can't. But with him, when he empowers you and he gives you everything you need, you can do the bold things. You can have the conversations, the spiritual conversations that need to happen. You can do those things. And look what he says in verse 16. Go and gather together, bring all of the Jews, and I want you to fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, then I will go and see the king. If I must die, I must die. Did you hear that bravery? There was a change all of a sudden. There was some... She had some pep in her step. Let me go pray. Let me go fast. I want you to do the same on my behalf. Isn't it nice to know that there are people that pray for you? That when you feel like, I just don't know that God's hearing, but you know that there are intercessors out there that are praying on your behalf. But you know right now, during this service, there are people praying for this church and for every person sitting in these seats right now. Do you know that? They're not even in our state. They're not even in our state. There are people that have prayed for you this week that have no connection to our church other than the fact that they know who I am, and I've talked to them, and I've shared things about our church, and they've been putting you on the prayer list. And they pray for you. When you know that somebody's praying for you, and you know that you're praying, and you know that God's hearing, you get a little bold, don't you? I know a thing or two. I'm not as scared about this situation. I'm not scared about the diagnosis. I'm not scared that I lost the job. I'm not scared that I got this, because I know that my God is bigger than that. And that if wherever he leads me, he's going to provide for me what I need to be able to accomplish what he wants to be accomplished. And what I love about her bravery, the short version of this whole story, is she started out in a bad place, but God will use Esther to save an entire nation. We probably would not be having this conversation about Israel if it wasn't for Esther and her bravery. To stop and pray, not panic. Not get all up in alarms, but just stop and focus and hear from God and fast and go and have the conversations. And what I love is Esther didn't say, I've got some words I can go tell him. She didn't know what to tell him. But what she knew, if she would get away with God, that God would give her the words that she would need to speak to the king for him to hear. And what I love is, as God is giving Esther what to say, he is softening the heart of Xerxes so the message could be heard. And here's what's really cool, because the king changes his mind and decides, I'm not going to annihilate the Jews. So Haman's plan backfires, and he ends up being hung and the Jews ended up being saved. And shortly after this story, there are two guys. There's a guy named Nehemiah. You know that guy? Ends up building the city, right? And you got a guy named Ezra. And these two guys they lead these Jewish people back to their homeland after being gone for over 100 years. And after a few generations, another Jewish girl, a descendant of one of these people that Esther saved, is visited by an angel and told that she is pregnant with the Messiah, the very Son of God. Because she was faithful. What would have happened if she chose not to? What would have happened if she would have decided, I know I have some influence, but I don't want to use it? Because I'm more concerned that if I use it, it's going to cost me something. Hey, everybody, the Bible says that we take up our cross every day. It does cost us something. It costs sacrifice to walk and be a follower of Jesus. It costs. There is a cost to it. So here's a couple of things I want you to see from this passage. Mordecai recognized that God had sovereignly placed Esther in a palace as a part of his plan. God allowed some things to happen, and he got her there. And I know you're thinking, wait a second, didn't she get to the palace because she made some immoral choices? Yeah, she did. But listen, the book of Esther doesn't dwell on how she got there, but it dwells on the fact that she's there now and the influence that she has there. And somewhere along the way, Esther became a godly woman. And it doesn't tell us when or how that happened, but at some point, she became a godly woman she knew she needed to pray and fast in a pagan, thick culture. And so in Esther 4, what we see her, she's recognizing God's purpose in her life. God's put me here for a reason. I'm here for a reason. And God's agenda has to be above everything. I'm going to put God's agenda first. Her life was hinging on her realizing that she had been sovereignly placed where she is. Have you ever stopped to think that the place that you work, God may have sovereignly placed you there for a reason? Not just to push a pen or type something or fix something or build something, that he's placed you there for a reason. That is your mission field. Even our community. I hear a lot of people, especially with seniors that graduate, how they're so ready to get out of Moncks Corner. Don't want to be here. I don't like Moncks Corner. But you ever thought that maybe God has you here for a reason? The people that are here the longest have the most influence. The churches that are here the longest have the most influence. Maybe rethink that the places that God has placed you, He's sovereignly placed you there for His purposes. And it doesn't have to be, I hate going to my job every day. Maybe if you saw it differently. Maybe if you saw that you've been placed as a part of His plan in that place. So Esther didn't go to the palace because she made great choices. She made some very bad choices that got her there, but she's there, and her life's hinging on it. And what I love is that He sovereignly places her where His role is going to play with her response. I love that she's at a place in life by God's sovereign design. We're all at a place in life by God's sovereign design. If I went back and shared my story of how I got to Moncks Corner, it's crazy. I didn't know this place existed, okay? I didn't know Moncks Corner sounded like, I don't know what it sounds like. It doesn't sound like a very pleasant place to live. It's not like Mount Pleasant. You know what you're getting. It's Moncks Corner. Like, what is this? But I was in college, and my wife's roommate and some of my suite mates, by the way, suite mates were the people that lived in your dorm that adjacent to it. Okay, so when I say suite mates, I just want to make sure everybody understands what that term meant when I was in college. It may mean something else different now. But let's just say with roommates. My roommates were from Moncks Corner, and we came here. Like, I don't know, they wanted to come back to Moncks Corner for the weekend, so we came. And this was, there was a Blockbuster. Anybody remember the Blockbuster that was here? That was our entertainment. We went and rented a movie, and we stayed at Miss Frances Moss's house. Well, the ladies did. We stayed somewhere in Pinopolis. Now I know it's Pinopolis. I have no idea who we stayed with, but if you know that I stayed with you at some point in college, thank you for that. But I didn't know anything about this place. And I met Pastor Hal West. And there was something about him, because when I was in college, everybody talked about Pastor Hal and how great Pastor Hal was. I was like, he can't be that great. Everybody know Pastor Hal had an influence. He touched me, and he touched me, and he blessed me, and he's ministered to me, and he's changed my life, and blah, 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 blah. I was like, no way. Then I met Pastor Hal. It's like, man, I'd love to work for that guy one day. And wouldn't you know, within 5 years, I'm working for that guy. And we moved to Moncks Corner. And I love it here. And we've been here for a very long time. You just don't know how God will operate and will put you in the place. You just got to realize that we've been put here for a reason. That He's guiding. If we would just listen, God guides us and leads us. And I love the way that He will even use our past mistakes. Esther, that was not the way to meet a man. That was not the way to have character as a Jewish girl, to go and live that way, to do that, to live that lifestyle. It was not the right way. But God's purpose has played a role in her life. And part of God's redemption in your life is taking where you are right now and using you from that point on. But some of us won't even move forward because we're so stuck in the past thinking that God's going to penalize us for that. But He says He cast our sin as far as the east is from the west. You do need to get forgiveness for what you did in the past. But you need to make restitution where you can, and you need to move forward. But you need to know, you need to do that, and you need to move on, because here's the thing. God acts in the present, not in history. The history's already in the past. God is working right now in the present and in your future. He's not only the God of the cross who forgives your past, He's also the God of the resurrection that remakes your future. Can I get an amen? We need to know that. God can take mistakes and reweave those mistakes for His good. Your worst day can be the most powerful piece of your testimony for someone to come to know Christ. It was on Jesus' worst day that was good news for us. What's good news for us was bad news for Him. And our testimonies are powerful when we understand that God can weave through those mistakes. Let me give you 5 quick truths that will help you be influential. You ready? Pencils ready? Listen, God can use Mordecais and He can use Esthers. He can use Mordecais and He can use Esthers. Here's what I mean. Mordecais are the kinds of people you normally think of in church. They got it all together. They're good people. They're sincere. They got good faith. They've been involved in the church. They've not been involved in any major scandals. They have, quote unquote, boring testimonies. By the way, no testimony is boring, but I'm just saying. I remember when people would ask me to share my testimony, I was like, sure, I'll share it. And then the person before me talks about how they were drug dealers and they were in jail for 14 years. And I'm like, I'm not giving my testimony. Mine's not that good, right? These Mordecais involved, they're part of the church. Probably the worst thing they ever did in life was they got caught speeding or they didn't flush the toilet one time. I mean, these are the Mordecais. But then you have the Esthers. The Esthers have all kinds of scandals. These are people that live filled with compromises. They live filled with all kinds of mistakes. They don't need to be convinced that they're sinners. They're people that are like, I don't even know if I can come to church because nobody's going to care that they're not going to want me there. They're not going to want me to be there. They know it. And they think that their past has disqualified them from God from being able to use you. But the only person that qualifies anything is not us. God qualifies us, right? He qualifies us through the cross. And from this story, what we see from this story is that you see that God has a plan for both the Mordecais and the Esthers. For those who you've gone through life and you say, my testimony is not really big and it's like boring, but it's not. Because here's the thing on testimony. Whether you've been a criminal for 40 years locked up on death row murder and you give your life to Christ, or you've never done anything outside of forget to put the recycling bin, whatever it is, here's the thing. Would you agree that the person that's been in jail for murder, that they are a sinner and they are dead in their trespasses? Would you agree with that? Would you agree that the person that forgets to put the recycling bin out when they're told to is dead in their trespasses? Here's the good news. Both of those, no matter what the sin, brand new life is on the other side through the cross. Every testimony is powerful because the hero of the testimony is not about what I did. The hero of the testimony is about what Jesus did and how it's through His cross and through His work on the cross that I could have a relationship with Him. And I love that. God has a plan for both. Esther is not the most outstanding character in the Bible. She's never commended in the New Testament. You notice that. It doesn't talk about her. Matter of fact, she's not even mentioned. God's not even mentioned in her book. If you read the book of Esther, it doesn't say God. And she got her position by winning some sex competition, and yet Esther is the person that God uses to preserve the Messianic line. Isn't that crazy? That he chooses to use her. It has to be God that brings salvation in the world, and God brings salvation sometimes through the most unlikely, weak instruments. And Esther is young. She's a foreign orphan. She has this checkered past, and yet God brings salvation through her rather than just through Mordecai, who was strong and morally upright. Because sometimes your testimony, when you've gone through it, sometimes hearing that is encouraging to know that you made it through that. And I needed to hear that. Because maybe I don't know. Maybe you feel like you can't go through it, but some of you, the thing that you've been hiding behind, that you're so scared to talk about, you're so scared to admit that's a part of your story that God's redeemed, would be the very thing that would unlock freedom for somebody else when they hear it. So it doesn't matter what your ability is, it matters what your availability is. You want to have influence? I hear it all the time. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do this. Okay, what is your availability? Because there was a point, I didn't know how to ride a bicycle. Y'all remember those days? Like my son Stevenson the other day said, Dad, can you take the training wheels off? And I thought, oh boy, it's about to be a wild ride. Does he have the ability to ride the bike? Somewhere deep inside, he's going to be able to ride that bike down the street without boxes of Band-Aids and without having to wear a full Michelin Man outfit. Like, he's going to be able to do it. He's got the ability, but it's not there yet. But what does he have? He has the availability. I want to go out. I want to ride. Now, he'd ride all day. He'd ride all day. For some of you, you excuse things because you feel like I don't have the ability to do it. I can't stand in front of people and talk. I don't like being around kids. I don't like standing out telling people where to park. I don't like telling people what to do. I don't like sharing my faith because I don't want to be pushy on people. Listen, it's not about your ability, whether you can or you cannot. God will qualify those who are unqualified. It's a matter, do you have the availability to do it? Do you have the availability? Because when you started your job, I don't know what you do. We have so many different occupations represented in this room. But I would guarantee in your first day of the job, you didn't know what you're doing. I'd probably guarantee that some of you still don't know what you're doing, and you've been in the job. You don't even know what you do. Y'all have that one family member? It's like, I don't know what they do. Like, I have no idea. They say they go to work every day, but I have no idea what they do. You fake it until you make it. It's about availability. What would happen if you would take your life and put it into God's hands and say, I'm available, do what you want with me? Because I promise you it'll be far better than what you and I could do with it ourselves. Here's the next thing. God has been at work in your life whether you've recognized it or not. Did you know God's name does not appear in the book of Esther, but the working of God is all over this book. His fingerprints are all over the story. He's always working in the background. You didn't get here this morning by circumstance, by chance. Like we just decided this morning that we're going to be here. Just decided that today we're going to talk about this. It just so happens that, what if I told you that God orchestrates and will put you where you need to be when you need to be there? That He's always been at work in your life. But some of you just been running from it and not hearing it. But God's at work in your life. We saw that this morning. Like maybe you've come and you don't really know if God's moving in the church or not. The waters prove that God's working in the church. He's proven that He's working in our D groups and through our life groups, through our kids ministry, that He's working. Here's the other thing. He's at work, but you got to understand life's a risk. So risk your life for something that lasts. Risk it for something that lasts. Let me tell you what lasts. The gospel. What does it look like to risk it? Now, it may not be on a mission field. It may not be boarding a plane and selling everything you have and going to some remote location. It might, but it's not. But what would it look like for us to risk our lives for something that actually lasted? That would take availability. To make time, to make room for God to be able to move in that area. And then safety in our culture is just a myth. I try to convince myself to do all the right things so I don't die young. Right? Everything is dangerous to me. Anybody else feel that way? You're like that. Like I don't go to restaurants and sit with my back towards the door. I need to see. Like if I'm going to die, I want to see it coming. Right? I need to know how to protect myself and protect my family. That's just the way I am, and I try to do safe things. I'm the safety guy. I go to youth camp, and I'm the Debbie Downer on some things. Got to turn some ideas down because somebody's going to die. When honestly, ain't nobody going to die because we all made it. I mean, we used to slide down metal sliding boards in the summer into the dirt, not in this rubber plastic tire stuff. That's what's wrong with our country. It's soft. But safety is this myth. And we think that when we come to Jesus that it's safety. God calls us to do hard things. He calls us to do hard things. It's not the disciples didn't go, we're going to go with this because it's going to be the easiest thing of our career path, Jesus. We're going to follow you. And then he says, hey, by the way, you all will die. And every one of them were persecuted and martyred, with the exception of one. They couldn't take him out, so they sent him on an island called Patmos, and there John wrote the book of Revelation. You got to understand that life is a risk. Esther was not confident that her life would be saved. She was confident that God's purposes would be done. Will I die? Maybe. Does it matter? Nope. Because what matters is God's purposes and investing in that would last forever. And here's the last thing I want you to know, the need is urgent. If you want influence, you got to realize the need is urgent. Esther stood at the crossroads of a literal life or death moment, not just for her, but for an entire nation. And if she didn't act, people were going to die. They were going to lose their lives if she didn't say something. And we also stand in many ways at this literal crossroads of life and death for other people. We're believers. We're followers of Jesus. We have been redeemed. We have been adopted by the Father. And we literally are the life and death between his people and him. When we don't share the gospel, we don't proclaim the gospel, we don't live our lives in accordance to the scriptures. And notice, I didn't say that you live your life in perfection. We're not going to be perfect. And how many of us sinned on the way to church this morning? How many of us sinned while sitting here? We're not perfect. But God's people should be consistent. Following him, consistently following him. Acknowledging our brokenness, acknowledging that I need him. I need him. The cross was an example of God doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. It's the gospel. So we have this influence as followers of Jesus that we can choose to use to build his kingdom, or we can use to build our kingdom. But one of those is going to die, and one of those will last forever. Be internal, an eternal impact. I want to share this story, and I've shared it with you before, but when I think about influence, I think about my dad. My dad passed away March the 8th this year. And one day, he was a paramedic. He worked in the back of an ambulance, and I wanted to be just like my dad. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be an EMT, paramedic, then I wanted to go be a flight medic. That's all I wanted to do. I almost signed up to go in the Coast Guard. Would have been a really bad idea. Then my dad came to know Christ. Some volunteers from our church came to our house one night after we visited on a Sunday, and they knocked on the door, and they came in, and they began to share the gospel with my mom. And my mom gets down, and I see my mom in our living room bowing with tears in her eyes, asking Jesus to save her. And then she has to call my dad because my dad is out and about working a rescue call, and so they page him over the EMS paging system, that he is to report home, not a text message that you want to get on your beeper. And so my dad comes home, and they begin sharing the gospel with him, and my dad does the same thing and falls to his knees and begins to weep and to accept Jesus as a Savior. I'll never forget, he said, I don't want you to pursue this EMS thing. It's not what you want to do. But I was trying to be like him, because he told me that God had taken the back of an ambulance from being a hospital just for the physical, but for a hospital for the physical. He said every person that came in there got prayed over, whether they liked it or not. What are they going to do when they're strapped down? They have to hear the gospel. It's like, you're right. And my dad surrendered his to a call to run a camp, a summer camp. We're not camp people. Like, I grew up in the country. I learned how to drive a tractor before I learned how to drive a car. Learned how to drive a stick shift before I learned how to drive a car. But we were not going out in the sticks and running summer camp type people. Like, how do you translate being a paramedic to being a summer camp director? But he said, God's called me to this. And he interviewed, and they asked him what his experience was. He said, I have none, but I have a calling on my life. And our family moved to Bennettsville, South Carolina. That was my faraway land. And we moved to Bennettsville, South Carolina, and he took the job in 1996. And he worked every single summer for 27 years, faithfully, to a job that paid little, didn't come with a bunch of accolades, came with a lot of sacrifices. We didn't get family vacation like everybody else because 8 weeks out of the summer was committed to camp. But when my dad passed away, we went to his visitation, and the floods of people that were coming in, sharing their life story, of the influence he had had on their life that we had no idea. And we had figured out over the span from 96 to this year that over 15,000 people had come to the gates of that camp with an unexperienced camp director who had zero ability to run it, but had all the availability in the world, and he took a risk. We didn't even have a house to move to. We moved into his office. My sister and I had to live 3 feet apart, and we didn't even like each other. But we were sacrificed. And at the time, it didn't make any sense to me as a teenager. But at 41 years old, I look at it now and go, now it makes all the sense in the world. My dad had all the availability in the world, not the ability. And he was willing to take the risk because it was about the kingdom. It was about watching people come to know Christ. So I'm going to do something a little different off script because I feel like I can. For some of you, you've held back. You've held back. You know good and well that the Lord has been knocking on the door. And you've just been ignoring and ignoring and ignoring. But He's calling you. He's calling you into a relationship with Him. And today is the day that you accept that call and say, Jesus, I want to surrender my life to your Lordship. And if that's you this morning, I want you to just bow your head with me for just a second. And I just want you to pray this. It's not a special prayer. It's not a magical prayer. But it's a prayer that matters. And I just want you right now just to tell Jesus, if this is you, Jesus, I surrender my life to your Lordship. I make myself available. Save me. I believe you died on a cross for my sin, and that you rose again on the third day. Jesus, thank you for saving me. I surrender to you. If you prayed that prayer, your next step is baptism. And we're going to sing a song, and we'll stay here as long as we need to, and you can leave when we're done if you like, but you can stay as long as you want. If today you've prayed that prayer and you're ready to take your next step in baptism, I want to give you that opportunity. And you may say that I didn't come prepared, but we have things, we have shorts and everything you can use if you want to, or you can just get in like you are. It doesn't matter. It's not about anything else but just your posture of your heart when you enter to this pool. It's just obedience. And if you want to be baptized today, and you've accepted Jesus, and this is your next step, and you want to follow through with that, I want you to do me a favor. We're going to stand. So I'm going to go ahead and ask everybody to stand, and we're going to sing. But as we're doing that, if today you're ready to make that step, I want you to go right back to where that cross is. I'm going to ask one of our elders if you could stand at the cross. And if you're ready to make that decision this morning, just go right back there to the cross, and we're going to help get you ready to do that. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much. Just pray that we realize the influence that we have for your gospel. That we would proclaim it. We would feel urgency to proclaim it because, God, there's a lost world around us that needs to hear the gospel message of Jesus. They need to hear that there is a remedy for their sin, that there is a healing that they're looking for in their lives, the very thing that they're longing for. We have it. May we use our influence in a positive way to preach the gospel, to preach the truth. so that it can be accepted, because it's your gospel that changes us. So just pray right now for those who prayed that prayer, that they would just surrender and take that next step today. And I pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.